Welcome to our webinar. I apologize for the technical difficulty that we encountered. I see people are coming on. I hope everybody finds their way back to our webinar. We will get started. I'm Lisa Armoni, and I'm the director of the Rose Project of Jewish Federation of Orange County. And I'm pleased to see everybody here this evening for our third webinar, exploring the ramifications of a possible change of legal status in parts of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria by the Israeli government. The Rose Project is a resource for Israel education in our Jewish and broader Orange County community. On subjects around which there's a strong difference of opinion, we're guided by the Jewish principle of machloket l'shem shamayim, which means debate for the sake of heaven. That is, we understand the holiness of discourse and debate, and we want to try to provide platforms where we can deeply explore multiple views grounded in values-based discourse. We believe that this is essential for us to stay in community despite our differences. And we create the possibility that we can learn from one another by exploring precisely those issues where we don't agree. On the issue that we're exploring tonight, we know there are differences of views, and we see this reflected even in the language we use to describe it. Some refer to the issue as annexation of parts of the West Bank, while others refer to it as the extension of sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, and still others use the term change of legal status, which is probably a more neutral term. The difference in language is indicative of deeply contrasting ideological, philosophical, and political views on what this issue is about, what's at stake, and what are the aspirational visions of Israel held by the different sides. For the past few weeks, we've been exploring this issue as a community from different perspectives and through different lenses. And tonight, we're very fortunate to have with us the Jerusalem Post chief political correspondent, Gil Hoffman, who was well positioned in the heart of Israeli political discourse to give us insight into what and how this issue is being discussed in Israel, in the government, in official circles, and among key figures. Now, before we get started, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in tonight's event. At any time during the webinar, you can submit questions for Gil using the Q&A box, which is located on the bottom of your screen. After the presentation, I'll address your questions to Gil. I'll do my best to aggregate them so that we can make sure we hit on the different subjects, but I apologize in advance if we don't get to all of your questions. We are recording this webinar, and we'll be happy to share this recording as well as the recordings of our two previous webinars after the event. You'll also be able to find it very shortly on our website, www.jewishoc.org, and we're live streaming right now on Facebook. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce Gil Hoffman, and if you've been to Federation events in the past, you may have even met and seen Gil Hoffman. He's a longtime friend of the Jewish Federation here in Orange County. He has been the chief political correspondent and analyst for the Jerusalem Post for more than 20 years, and he also teaches international communications at Israel's College of Management. You may have seen Gil on other TV networks, as he often provides analysis on international news outlets such as CNN and Al Jazeera. He was raised in Chicago, and he worked for several American newspapers before moving to Israel. So Gil, today is July 1st, at least here in America, where you are, it's probably July 2nd by now. And this is the day that many people who have been involved in this conversation have been anticipating for a long time. Because today is the day that officially the Israeli government said it could introduce legislation on changing the legal status in parts of the West Bank. Not only have those of us involved been connected to Israel been involved in this conversation, but across the country and indeed in places across the world, there have also been demonstrations opposing annexation by many Palestinian communities and their allies. So this was quite supposed to be quite an eventful day. So I'm going to turn this over to you and just really begin by asking you, was this in fact an eventful day, or did it not quite live up to the expectation?
Hello. Thank you so much to Lisa, to Alexandra Mars, and to the wonderful team of the Jewish Federation of Orange County. And thank you to the more than 100 participants who are here on Zoom and probably a similar amount on Facebook. The very fact that you care so much to tune in, it really warms my heart. Um, I've had the privilege of speaking for the Jewish Federation in Orange County many, many times, actually, probably more than any other Jewish federation in the United States. You guys are the best. But why is this talk for the Jewish Federation of Orange County different than any other talk I've had before? And in the tradition of Jews asking, why is this night different from all other nights? And so reason number one is that it's 5:30 in the morning. They've never asked me to speak at 5:30 in the morning before. Um, reason number two is that almost none of you are wearing shoes. I've never had a talk like that before. And the final reason is that in all other talks I've had, yeah, my audience has desperately wanted to touch their phone. They wanted to be on their phone. They were wondering, is it impolite to be on their phone while they're at a speech? And they were forcing themselves to not touch their phone. You all can touch your phone as much as you want. You're even on your phone right now. You can feel more comfortable than you've felt at any other lecture that I've done, and any other lecture that you've attended for the Jewish Federation before March. So you could feel pretty good about that. Now, as Lisa said, this was a great day for a webinar because we all thought that something would happen today. And you'll notice throughout this talk, you will not get what my opinion would be about this plan, this yet as unannounced plan. Uh, you know, writing for the Jerusalem Post, my job is to tell it like it is, give all the different sides, and let people think for themselves. The one thing that made me want there to be a plan today was to help your webinar. I thought, wouldn't it be great if this was a really big day and I'd have so much to say about what happened, tell people what happened behind the scenes today. Well, no. Today was a very big anticlimax. Um, and that's okay. Things don't necessarily happen immediately when you say they could potentially happen. July 1st first came into our horizon when the negotiating teams of Likud in blue and white wrote in their coalition agreement that the process of applying sovereignty to parts of Judea and Samaria could start happening as early as July 1st. People are very good at ignoring words like as early as, but they are very important words. And I suggest that all of you start using them because they're great. Those of you who are still in the working world, I suggest you start telling your bosses, I will get that done as early as a week from today. You've committed yourself to nothing. Those of you who are married or in a relationship, I would suggest you using those words. I will take out the garbage, of course, as early as a few minutes from now. It could mean any time in the next 20 years. And your partner should not be upset by your response. You kept your promise. So that is what has happened. We started the day, July 1st in the morning, with the first interview that our foreign minister, Gabi Ashkenazi, has granted any media outlet in several weeks, if not months. And he was asked, okay, so what's going to happen today? And he actually said the words, I don't know. Ask Netanyahu. And I tweeted this immediately because I was so shocked. I had until then had felt bad that I didn't know. And I felt so much better when the foreign minister of Israel admitted that he didn't know either. Um, and so I guess there was not what to know yet. The nightly news in Israel, the highest rated show on television is not the Israeli version of American Idol or Survivor. It's the news, because the news is more entertaining, more funny, and more reality than any reality show there could be. And the very fact that uh, two of the three nightly newscasts, they're all aired at the same time, only got to deal with the annexation sovereignty issue 25 minutes into their report, into their newscast. The other one, 21 minutes, um, I think really says it all. It showed that the focus in Israel right now, with all due respect, is on Corona and COVID-19. That is what people are dealing with day in and day out. The health and economic ramifications. Yesterday, July 1st, will be remembered in Israel as the day that a record number, 868 Israelis, were tested positive for COVID-19. That's horrible. Anyone who thought, okay, today's going to be a horrible day in Israel's history, tell your friends, you were right, but for a very different reason than you thought. Um, and so that's where the focus is. And Netanyahu's going to have a hard time attracting the attention of the people of Israel whenever he decides to do this. Let's now go back in history. When an Israeli speaker says he wants to go back in history, it usually means 3,000 years. Let's go to the end of January. The end of January, Netanyahu went to Washington. So did Benny Gantz, his competition in the election, separately. They both went, and they met with Donald Trump, and that is where the plan was revealed. And the reason why the plan was revealed then was for one simple reason. We had an election coming up, and Netanyahu wanted to get a boost from Donald Trump. There had been a feeling that in the second of three elections that the American administration didn't do its part to help Netanyahu get elected, and so the third one, they were going to go for the jugular, so that we wouldn't have to have more elections. And so, yeah, they did it. And we got to find out what's in the plan. So the momentum has been lost since January. That over time, people got more focused on the coronavirus and its economic ramifications. And when Israelis are asked what challenges that Israel is facing today are most important, the annexation sovereignty issue, it does not get more than 10%. If you're saying the Jewish community, when people aren't paying attention or whatever, even in Israel, they're not. I hope I'm not going through a video issue on two different links here. Start my video again. Okay, here I am back. Good. So over that time, Netanyahu has also lost support. If Benny Gantz came there and wholeheartedly endorsed the plan initially, now he's saying, well, dealing with the coronavirus is more important right now and everything else should wait, which he cannot say. The coalition agreement between him and Likud says this government will deal with the coronavirus and only the coronavirus, except that starting on July 1st, we're going to start dealing with applying sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. If Benny Gantz didn't like that, he should have said it back then, because he's agreed to that. Over time, there's also been the loss of support among other populations in Israel. The Israeli right is very divided because there is a Palestinian state that is part of the plan, and because there are, we'll get to exactly where and how very soon, areas that could become enclaves surrounded by Palestinian territory. The Arab and Muslim world, which is a very big part of the plan, is no longer on board. What had been said really now for a couple of years was that the success that Jared Kushner and Donald Trump had was that they had brought the Saudis to play a major role. That no president had ever succeeded in doing before, which was a big deal. Every president wanted to get the Saudis on board. Bill Clinton begged them. Barack Obama, of course, pleaded with the Saudis to get involved in the Middle East peace process. Donald Trump also, his first trip abroad as president of the United States was to Saudi Arabia. And that was because the way he attributed the importance of the Saudis playing a major role in a peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. He was the first human being to fly from Israel to Saudi Arabia, everybody knew about, ever. And you know what? They said no at that time. They only changed their tune after the Saudis made a very bad mistake that I hope none of you make the next time you see me, which is they killed a Middle Eastern journalist. Very bad idea. Don't do it. And that made them be more beholden to an American administration than the Saudis had ever been before. And that made them have to agree to what the Americans wanted, and that was to be involved in a peace process. Well, we haven't heard about the Saudis in a very long time, and their more vocal, very close ally, the United Arab Emirates, had their ambassador actually write an article in an Israeli newspaper to say, you will lose us if you go forward with this plan. So that is a change that's happened over the last several months. Well, so even if Netanyahu does not have the Israeli center, left, or far right, never had Europe or the UN, and doesn't have a lot of people identify as Democrats in the United States, and doesn't have the potential allies in the Arab and Muslim world who are supposed to be granting their support to a more regional peace process than we've ever had before, which was the main benefit that had been talked about for the last few years, that Israel would get normalization with the Arab and Muslim countries. Would he still move forward with the plan? The answer is absolutely. Does he need any of those people that I just mentioned? He either lost or never had. The answer is absolutely not. Netanyahu controls his destiny completely. Netanyahu, as long as he has Donald Trump, can do whatever he wants. Does he still have Donald Trump? No one can predict what Donald Trump will do. That is something that in an America that is hyper-polarized in its internal politics, everyone can agree on. So we are waiting to see what the President of the United States is going to do. And that puts into perspective a couple reports that there have been, one last night and one in February. First of all, last night, there were reports that the Palestinian Prime Minister, Mohammed Shtayyeh, said in a briefing to a think tank in Washington that he's hoping that Joe Biden wins the election, which wouldn't be a newsflash. But that basically that's their strategy in how to handle the threat from their perspective of annexation. I found that fascinating, that this is their strategy. What they're going to do is wait, not have violent protests somewhere, a strategy that's tried and failed for them in the past, whether the protests were successful or not. It hadn't helped them in any way, really. And there were protests scheduled for July 1st. They did indeed take place. They were pathetic. People didn't come. So that apparently that's not going to be their strategy. If anyone was worried about there being violence over the next few weeks and months, if it'll happen, it's not going to be government authorized, which will make them not be as successful as they would have been. Nope, their strategy is to wait for you to elect a different president. And the other report that puts this into perspective is the report of myself in the Jerusalem Post, my interview with Netanyahu in February. Now, obviously, a lot has changed since February, but the headline of my interview with Netanyahu was that any Democratic president who gets elected will implement Donald Trump's plan. It was counterintuitive when we heard it to begin with. And it has obviously become less realistic since then with everything that Joe Biden himself has said and advisors on the Middle East to him. We're in Israel listening to anything that any potential vice president is saying. Susan Rice has been the most open about her views on the matter. Anything your governor of California says, please tell us. We are listening intently to whatever she has to say. And we'll take that very seriously. But the question that I've not gotten answered lately, and believe me, I've been asking every possible Netanyahu advisor, is would Netanyahu still say that now? That he knows that any Democrat elected president of the United States will continue implementing Donald Trump's Middle East plan. Does Netanyahu know something we don't know about what Joe Biden really thinks and has not been able to say publicly and would not say during a campaign? Ladies and gentlemen, never believe anything a politician says during a campaign. But something he says behind closed doors to someone important who does not vote, that maybe you can believe. So Joe Biden calls Netanyahu my friend Bibi. Maybe he told my friend Bibi something else. So what's going to happen? Well, next week, apparently, according to the United States ambassador to Israel, who told the Jerusalem Post yesterday, today by your time, the plan is going to be announced next week. Okay, not July 1st, next week. So plan another webinar. So what will this plan say? Well, as in January was announced, up to 30% of Judea and Samaria could potentially be have sovereignty applied to it. So you're going to now be seeing a map or two that is being shared with you, maps of the West Bank, as it is known by the world because it's the West Bank of the Jordan River. And in the biblical terms are Judea and Samaria. And so you're seeing on this first map different regions of Judea and Samaria. Shomron is Samaria. Binyamin and the Hebron area are part of Judea. And the Jordan Valley that you've been hearing so much about. These are the areas that make up the West Bank. That is a term for all of the area. So up to 30%. That is your second favorite words after as early as, um, that you can start using in your daily life. Tell your boss, I will do up to everything you've told me to do. And then you're pretty safe. Tell your wife, I will do up to all the chores that you have asked me to do today. And you could end up doing none of them. And then you have accomplished what you have told her you will do. So 30%. 30%. You now see a second map. Uh, you are seeing and lots of splotches here. Well, the darkest brownish splotches are Area A, which are Palestinian cities that have been under that full Palestinian Authority control since the mid 1990s in the peace process that began in Oslo. Um, those areas will definitely remain part of what would potentially become a Palestinian state, as would the lighter brownish, tannish color there, which is Area B, which since that same time in the mid 1990s have been under full Palestinian civil control, Israeli military control. That does not mean the IDF is there. It means the IDF could potentially go in for any reason. Then again, they also potentially go into Area A for any reason, but have more legitimacy to go in. Can go in with Palestinian Authority approval. So those are the Palestinian areas that are definitely going to be part of that Palestinian entity forever. Israel already gave them up a generation ago. The powder blue has its fate undecided. That is Area C, where you have 450,000 Jews and 300,000 Palestinians, and but the overwhelming majority of it is empty, barren land. Any Jew who lives over the pre-67 border lives in Area C, not in Area A or Area B, where there's not one Jew. And so that is the area that we are talking about right now. The 30% would have to come from there. If you total the number of Jews who live there, the percentage of the West Bank in total that is occupied by Jews, using a physical term, not a legal one, is still less than 10%. Jews live on less than 10% of the land in the West Bank. So if we're talking about applying sovereignty to 30%, then you're taking definitely pretty much where any Jew would lives right now, and then adding to it empty, barren land. The overwhelming majority of it would be in the Jordan Valley, where very few people live at all, because it is very, very hot and very, very isolated. So now, questions about that are, does that mean that the remaining 70% will automatically become part of a Palestinian state? And the answer is probably yes. People talk so much about what Israel would get from this plan, but all along, from Donald Trump's first speech announcing that he was recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, even in that speech, he said, but that does not preclude there being a Palestinian capital of Jerusalem as well. People have focused so much about what Trump is giving Israel that you've forgotten that he's actually been fair to the Palestinians all along. He's always said, but I'm giving them two. He just hasn't specified as much what they get or taken action on the ground like he did with actually giving Israel its capital in Jerusalem and recognizing Israeli control over the Golan Heights. Now, another thing that has not happened yet is that Netanyahu and Donald Trump, because they have not said where the map is going to be, no actual action can take place yet. For action to take place, you need the IDF to be told what to do. The Justice Ministry that would have to implement a change in law. They've not been told what to do either. What is applying sovereignty? Applying sovereignty means that the Jews living in that area that are right now subjected, just like the Palestinians, to Israeli military law would instead be part of Israeli regular law, like within the pre-67 borders. Right now, for them to build anything, even add on to their home, they need permission from the Israeli army. Well, I live in pre-67 Israel. I don't need permission from the Israeli army. I need permission from the Ministry of Interior or from the Ministry of Construction and Housing. I need to go through a lot of bureaucracy. They need to go through more. That will change. Every little thing would change for them. And people say, oh, it wouldn't change anything for them. Wrong. Right now, if my car got stolen overnight, God forbid, my insurance company will give me a new car because I live here. Well, if I lived in Efrat, which at this time before the traffic starts might be a 15-minute drive away, straight south from here, if my car gets stolen, kiss it goodbye. The insurance company ain't going to help me at all because they don't live in Israel, not according to the New York Times, according to their insurance company. So that would change completely. And so the IDF, the Justice Ministry, have not been told what to do about how to apply Israeli sovereignty. Now, those of you who debate the word sovereignty, annexation, rest assured, they're both right. Okay, all of you have been writing op-eds, don't call it the annexation. No, they're going to do both. Applying sovereignty applied to the people. That will be part of the plan, yeah. They're going to annex land legally. There you go. We'll actually take the process that was done with Jerusalem over time. They started doing it in June 1967. They completed the process in 1980, but they did it. And the same thing happened quicker with the Golan Heights in 1981. But it will take time, but the actual legal process of annexing land from being disputed territory to being Israeli territory, just like where I live, will happen. So if you see annex in the headline, don't write a letter to the editor. That will also affect the way Israel is perceived in the International Criminal Court, which is in the process of deciding whether Israel did something wrong by building or doing anything else in settlements which are disputed territory. Well, once it becomes Israeli territory by Israeli law, it is actually more justified to do anything there. So it is an actual legal response to that International Criminal Court. And it is very possible that one of the reasons why nothing happened on July 1st was because Netanyahu was waiting for The Hague to talk first and then have this be the Israeli reaction to whatever they rule. Don't be surprised if that is what happens next week. The process that will then happen also will involve giving the Palestinians a lot of money. That has been part of the plan to begin with. That in return for America recognizing Israeli control over whatever areas will be announced, the Palestinians will get billions to use to develop their state in the making. And the Palestinians have already said they're not going to cooperate with the plan, in which case I will gladly accept their billions on their behalf. and then give it to them whenever they'd be willing to accept it, but start using part of it right away. Um, but the plan will call for, as at least according to what we heard in January, that the Palestinians would get a state. There would just be benchmarks that are nearly impossible about them recognizing Israeli control over whatever would be given to Israel, recognizing Jerusalem as our capital, being completely demilitarized, taking action against Hamas, etc., that are nearly impossible for them to do. You would have to have the right kind of Palestinian leadership that they have never had before. Um, so why will Netanyahu do this? Well, Netanyahu wants Israel to have more secure borders. Whether you like Netanyahu or not, you cannot deny that what he cares about is Israeli security. What is less legitimate is that he cares about his own legacy. Netanyahu wanted his legacy to be preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Well, he's not going to attack Iran, so his legacy could be this instead. And believe me, he wants a legacy. If he went through 3 grueling elections in order to get 18 more months in power, he's going to do it. He's not going to squander this time. And he is in power. The Israeli government is not going anywhere. If you heard anyone say, oh, Israel's going to another election, another few months, no, they're going to continue to bicker. Legally, they, according to the coalition agreement, could have an election initiated at the end of March. That would happen in June if they can't pass a state budget. I'm telling you, that's not going to happen, because the people of Israel might be very divided over annexation and sovereignty. They are united on not wanting another election anytime soon. Certainly not as long as the coronavirus is here, and it is not going anywhere, unfortunately. So that is what is happening, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing happened today, but things will happen next week. Things will happen over the next few months and years. Stay tuned to www.jpost.com to watch all the excitement as it happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gil. Thank you for your presentation. We're going to take a couple of questions. They're coming into the question box. And please, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to add your questions to the question box. I'm going to start with a question. I want to talk to you. I want to ask you about your statement about the International Criminal Court. If I heard you correctly, you said that you felt this was a response, the annexation would be a response to the ICC, and that Israel would have more justification for building over the Green Line if the territories were under Israeli sovereignty. I want to maybe pose it through a different lens and get your reaction to it. I think my understanding is that the international community, while they may have been calling for the parties to come together and work out a negotiated settlement, at the same time, they recognized the occupation, and I use that very much in the sense of the international legal term of occupation. I don't mean any sort of moral implications, but that the occupation was legal because Israel came to acquire the territories through a defensive war, and that their ultimate settlement would come through negotiation. If Israel were to actually go ahead and change the legal status, something that no previous government has done, including governments under right-wing leaders such as Shamir, and including past Netanyahu governments, would this possibly change the view of the international community in terms, the other way, in terms of the annexation is illegal and therefore settlement building is illegal? And unjustified. Is that a possibility?
Yes, Israel will look bad to the entire world. There's no doubt about that. Part of the arguments that Israeli diplomats and other spokesmen have been making is that Israel only acquired land in wars of defense and then legally and legitimately then had them, and then negotiated their fate with the Palestinian leadership that never came to the table in a serious kind of way. I think I overheard that my friend Carolyn the consulate in LA would be on here. I hope she's here. Israel's making your job harder, Carol. This will be harder to explain around the world if Israel decides to take a unilateral step. The whole point of the Oslo peace process was that no side would take unilateral steps, and that was the accomplishment was that both sides got the other to not take unilateral steps. And so here Israel would indeed be taking a unilateral step. And while technically the status of the territories would become easier to explain specifically to the International Criminal Court, it would be harder to explain to others all around the world. Why would Netanyahu do that anyway? The answer is, if you look at Netanyahu consistently over the last 30 years, he cares about America, not about the rest of the world. The rest of the world be damned. Look I don't know if your synagogues are open in Orange County, but if you go to the synagogue on Zoom this Shabbat, then you will hear the Torah reading that declares us a nation that will dwell alone, and that's a blessing, apparently. But we're not. And from Netanyahu's perspective, we are. And we are a nation that, if you have the President of the United States saying he can do something, that's good enough for him.
So we have some questions about the position of Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi, and sort of, you started at the beginning saying that Gabi Ashkenazi didn't know what was going to happen today, but I'm wondering if you're hearing things from them. Where are they in the conversation? Are they support? I mean, we don't hear very much.
Neither do we. I've been covering blue and white since before they were born. And so I'd like to think I know them as well as any other human being. And I still can't tell you what they believe in on any key issue. Gabi Ashkenazi was on the radio this morning, your time, at 23 and a half hours ago. And he said he did not know what was in the plan. And he said he is in favor of the plan in general. But what his opinion matters, because the Americans want to have a plan that a consensus of Israelis would support. Consensus of Israelis means Likud and blue and white. So the Americans want Gantz and Ashkenazi to speak in favor of it, or they're not going to announce it. And so they actually, this thought that Jared Kushner is using Gantz and Ashkenazi as an excuse to put in less than was announced in January, and that Gantz and Ashkenazi are using the Americans to put in less. Everyone's using each other. Well, at a certain point, you have to agree on what there will be. And so even though legally Netanyahu does not need blue and white to move the plan forward, politically he has a majority without them in the cabinet, the security cabinet, and the Knesset. I still think that the Americans would only announce a plan that blue and white would be publicly in favor of.
Okay, thank you. There are a number of people who want to get to hear your best guess on what plan Netanyahu is likely to put forward. Is he really thinking, and is he likely to annex the full 30%, or is there, some experts have suggested that maybe just a very minimal annexation of some of the key settlement blocks. What's your gut sense on that, if you have one?
If you're going to play the market, don't play the market and guessing what Donald Trump is going to do. Anything can happen. Anything. With the foreign minister of Israel said yesterday, who definitely knows what's going on, even though he doesn't speak about it publicly. If he says, "I'm not a prophet," that's what he said when asked this question, then it can still be anything. Listen to Netanyahu. Netanyahu, in a speech to Kufai, the Christians United for Israel a few days ago, spoke about Shiloh and Beit El being part of the plan. Shiloh and Beit El are not part of settlement blocks. So if you're talking about doing a minimum, which is annexing Gush Etzion to the south of Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim to the north of Jerusalem, that's the minimum. And then you can say, oh, I annexed part of the Jordan Valley because Ma'ale Adumim is in the Jordan Valley. Well, that's certainly not the indication we got from Netanyahu just a few days ago, in his own words, and talking to an audience that he sees as crucial for advancing the plan. Sounds like he's going for more of a maximum than a minimum, if he's including those parts. Now, there's also a possibility there could be a phased plan. That could happen. The Oslo was initially called Jericho first. Israel gave up Jericho first. Well, maybe Ma'ale Adumim, 5 minutes away from Jericho, could be first. We'll see.
Somebody is asking about how do you interpret the Palestinian Authority's response to all of this? I mean, the sense that they're going to wait for Biden on the eve of something that could be potentially quite deleterious for the Palestinian population, at least I think as many Palestinians understand it. Is this indicative of the weak status of the Palestinian Authority? Is there internal Palestinian dynamics at play that might explain the Palestinian Authority's sort of what might be considered to be a less than rigorous response to this?
It was a conclusion by Donald Trump at the very beginning that the Palestinian Authority leaders weren't going to do anything for him. He met with them. He wasn't impressed. And he saw how little he did to help Barack Obama, who so far went out of his way to please them and help them. And people think Israel, Netanyahu slapped Obama in the face. The Palestinian leadership slapped Obama in the face so much more than Netanyahu ever did. Let's not forget what Barack Obama's peace plan was. The plan that he announced a couple days before Netanyahu was set to arrive in Washington, without telling Netanyahu in advance, by the way, was that borders would be decided first. Refugees would be decided last, which is a nice way of saying the Palestinians get everything they want in advance without giving up the main thing that they would need to give up. That they wrote that Abbas himself wrote in the New York Times earlier that week that they would never give up, which is that all the Palestinians around the world would have the right to return not into the Palestinian state, but into the final borders of the state of Israel, which would make Israel into a majority Muslim state. And there would be 2 states for one people, the Palestinian people, and no Jewish state anymore. That is Barack Obama's plan. And the Palestinians did not advance that plan. The Israelis, even though that was the meeting with Netanyahu and Obama that went the worst, where Barack Obama had started with a hand down here and ended up like covering his own face while Netanyahu was lecturing him. Still, Israel agreed to cooperate with that plan, and the Palestinians didn't. So it's because of that Donald Trump's strategy was the opposite. Give Israel what it wants, and then get them to make concessions, and then that would bring the Palestinians to the table, or even not do it without them. Have the Palestinian businessmen be a part of the plan, have the Saudis in the United Arab Emirates be a part of the plan. I don't know if any of them still are behind the scenes, but that's what Donald Trump was doing. He decided the Palestinian Authority would be irrelevant. That was his strategy.
Okay, Gil. Well, I want to thank you very much for your presentation and for your analysis and for visiting Orange County again today. I want to just remind everybody that our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, July 9th. So it's a week from tomorrow at 10 a.m. And we'll be hearing from Michael Makovsky from an organization called JINSA, who's going to make the case for why actually annexing the Jordan Valley is in the best security interests of the United States, Israel, and the region. So I hope you will all join us then. We will receive an email with information on how to register. Gil, thank you for spending your early morning hours with us. I appreciate you getting up so early, and we hope to see you soon.